Okay, so other than showing the trailers, I didn't really have anything specific planned. There were some questions that I had come up with. And yeah, I'd just like to open the floor and kind of see what people think. So they were in order of the way that we had them on the list, kind of in alphabetical order based on the Jane Austen novel that they came from. But yeah, anyone have a favorite that they want to talk about, or anyone have questions or?
I have a question. I'm Trish Johnson from Eastern Washington, Idaho. I was wondering what y'all thought about how in these novels that in the modern adaptations, how they handle the narration and dialogue and those internal thoughts. How do y'all think they did that in the modern versions of these novels?
Yeah, it's interesting to compare the web series to the movies, because a lot of times in the web series they're just talking to the camera, and so it sort of is like their internal processing. But in movies it's more complicated of how they do that.
Yeah.
Jamil?
So I think the movies, most of the movies are presented as rom-coms, and when you go down that route, that just does not capture the spirit of the novel. Whereas the web series might just be a different interpretation so that you can bring the story to the level of the viewer, who I assume, because it's a web series, is a younger crowd who's used to using social media and needs the what is it called? The cliff notes.
Yeah.
If you want to go. So they're just different intentions, I think.
Which did you like better?
Who, me? None.
Yeah.
I mean, if I take out of my head that it's a Jane Austen adaptation, I could just on the face of it enjoy Bride and Prejudice or Clueless. Clueless is has become a cult classic, but I have to tell myself, don't look at it as a Jane Austen. I have to look at it that way. And then of
Yeah.
the other ones, I would say that, oh, and Ostentatious is different because that's just, ad-libbing, no, like oh, what is it called?
Mhm.
There's
It's just,
two different Ostentatious. So
oh,
this is a TV series.
oh, I was looking at the theater, which I'm okay with the theater version of
Yeah.
Ostentatious. But then of the web series, the only one that I would accept as legitimate, probably, and I'm a snob here, is the very first one that was ever done, Lizzie Bennet Diaries, because that was done by John and Hank Green, the Vlog brothers. The author, John Green is the author of the Fault in Our Stars, Looking for Alaska. I mean, he's a legitimate
Mhm.
writer in his own right, and his brother, because they have tried to make these things accessible to young people, which is why they have
Mhm.
their whole YouTube channel, Crash Course History, Crash Course Chemistry. They want to make things accessible, and I can see how Lizzie Bennet Diaries were done to make Pride and Prejudice accessible to young people.
Mhm. Mhm.
Anyone?
Anybody else?
Sarah?
Well, no, Trish asked, how do they do the internal dialogue? I want to go
Yeah.
back to that original question, because I think it depends on the vision of the director. Because if you look at, like, for example, Clueless, you get her internal dialogue as a narration over the movie. Um, and others where you just have to kind of assume what their internal dialogue is based on their actions. So I mean, it can be done, and it takes a talented director to make it flow correctly without having it just be just a dump of information. Like I felt I watched the Pride and Prejudice Latter Day comedy, and I felt like they had something that could have been good. But they did a lot of that sort of like they just didn't know what they were doing. You know, they were trying to do a little bit of narration, and then they moved away from it, and they tried to do quotes, and they so it can be a big jumbled mess, or it can be a real well articulated film, as all films are. You know, you any source material can be poorly put together with a bad vision.
Yeah, Jamel?
I was going to say that when I heard Jackie in Pride and Prejudice Atlanta say the exact line that Mrs. Bennet says, I'm like, yes, that one is going to work, because Jackie immediately I could see her as Mrs. Bennet. So
What's nice about that one is
Yes.
she's a loving mother to Lizzie, and she doesn't just like Jane and Lydia. She loves all of her daughters. So I think that's a nice contrast to some of the other Pride and Prejudice adaptations.
I was going to say, I just watched that one last night because I'd never watched it and I thought I'd get ready for today. But I have only watched about 4 of the others, but I'm with everybody else that Clueless and Bride and Prejudice are the 2 that I like the best. But I thought Prada to Nada was very good with the Mexican view. I thought they did a pretty good job with that, making it the culture that it was.
The Colonel Brandon character in that is just lovely.
Yes.
Yeah,
Talk about not judging a book by its cover.
right. He's an artist, and he's very helpful, and yeah.
I will say that one thing I found interesting when you look at like some of the Pride and Prejudice adaptations when they're different cultures is that you can see like how far we have not come with some of these ideas about marriage. You know, like, and that was the one thing I liked about the Pride and Prejudice Latter Day comedy is that the Mormons are very big on. I grew up Mormon, and so a woman's worth or girl's worth is based on her marriage, and I never thought of that in comparison to Regency England until I saw that. Well, and Bride and Prejudice also has a very similar, their cultural beliefs on marriage versus the Jane Austen story. I thought, because we can look at it and go, I can see how it is, and understand it, and I might not have done that had I not had that correlation between the modern adaptation and her book.
I'd like to put a little plug in for a couple of the other web series that aren't the ones that were done by the Lizzie Bennet Diaries, the Pemberley Digital Group. I think that they're really interesting in the sense of like they sort of strip the story down to its bare essence, because there isn't a lot of scenery. There's sometimes you don't see interaction with lots of groups. The Mansfield Park one is pretty interesting because it is set in England, and they do have some trips in one section, they go to Brighton, and that's sort of a stand-in for Southerton. And in another section, the Frankie, the Fanny character, goes to stay in Portsmouth. So I really like that one. I also really liked Rational Creatures, the one that was the adaptation of Persuasion. Anyone who's here who did the reviews want to put a plug in for one of the ones that you reviewed?
Well, it just came up from Prada to Nada. Yeah, it was, as I said in my review, it was the second time I saw it. And I enjoyed it both times. And, being Team Marianne, I'm very concerned about how she's treated and so forth. And while there's some elements I didn't like, overall, I think it did a good job with her. And Colonel Brandon, as we were just saying, just fantastic.
I like Debbie's comment that in the chat, I think they all show that Jane's understanding of humans has transcended time and cultures. A Mr. Collins is a Mr. Collins, and a Wickham is a Wickham. Yeah, that, they're sort of they're almost like archetypal characters.
So having the scenes, the one that you mentioned that had scenes where they go out to Brighton and places like that, do you think that it made a difference, that was important, that the background, the place, the setting was a British setting, or just simply it enhances?
I think so. That web series is sort of like halfway sort of traditional web series where it's Frankie in her room talking to the camera, and she's talking to her brother Will, who is in the Navy again. And so part of it, she's just talking to Will, and everyone who is in Mansfield Park, which is actually a fancy hotel now, the Bertram family know Will, so like they'll stop by and they'll say, hey. And then when they did the Brighton scenes and the Portsmouth scenes, you could kind of see where they were. And also, especially in the Brighton scenes, you would see bigger groups. The Henry Crawford character and the Mary Crawford character are in Mansfield Park because they're designers from London who are helping to redesign the hotel. So it's just an interesting take on it.
Well, so that made me think of the Lost in Austen miniseries, where Jemima Rooper, I think she plays the modern character. She goes through the cupboard like in Narnia style and ends up in Lizzie Bennet's time. And I think that really represents what we crave when we see an adaptation. We want to feel like we could be one of those characters. We could be there. And that's what she accomplishes, with Lost in Austen. I don't know that I feel that if I don't, see the scenery the same, etc.
Something I love about the Lost in Austen is the whole toothbrush scene. We get this whole romanticized vision of what life was like. And then when you think about, oh, maybe I don't want to be without my toothbrush, even if it's in Georgian England.
About Lost in Austen was that it really showed how different Lizzie was, because I don't think when you read the book these days, she's very radical. But when you put a modern day person back in there, it is quite radical, quite different. Lots of things are advanced that you might skip over in the book because lots of women refuse proposals, etc., these days.
I think seeing Lizzie Bennett just take to like a fish to water in coming into the modern world made you realize that she was a woman ahead of her times. She would have, you know, clicked.
Yes, very much so.
You know, I'm probably one of the few people that did not like Clueless. I just did not like it. The thing about it is that when I read Austen or anything about Austen, I want to be in the Regency period. I want to experience it. I want to smell it and taste it. I want to wear it. I want to be there. I don't I hate that I don't like modern versions, but I just don't like modern versions of it. You know, just I know, and I know that it's good to introduce young people to it, like you said, you know, introducing, bringing it up to date for young people to be interested in it. But I taught a special ed class, a 9th through 12th class, and I found short adaptations of classics. And I found Pride and Prejudice of all things. And these were primarily Black kids from the inner city, and they liked it. But it was the old story. It was the original story. It was kind of, you know, what you'd call dumbed down. It was a very short adaptation of it, but they were interested in it. They were interested in learning about that period of time, and they couldn't believe the things that they did and how the women were treated and how they dressed. And I brought in some samples of food they made. They were just like, oh my gosh, why would anybody live like this? They didn't get that that was how it was, you know. But whenever I'm going to be going to England in the next 2 years, I'm going to be wearing my dress. I'm going to be there at these balls dancing, and I don't want I don't want to be wearing an outfit that's just everyday outfit. And I don't want y'all to dislike me because of that.
So do you think it makes a difference if the director's a woman or not?
Yes, yes.
Bride and
Me-
yeah. Bride
For
and
me,
Prejudice.
women. Go ahead.
I was going to say Bride and Prejudice, for example, that was Myra Nair. I can't remember her name, but a very well-known Indian director. And I don't know, I felt like there was more sensibility to what should be translated into the story.
Yeah.
But I
I
don't know.
think women know women. We know our inner thoughts. We know how we feel. Uh, we know things about our inner selves that men can't possibly begin to understand. They may try to, and they'll say, I know that's frustrating for you, or I understand how you feel, but they don't. You know, we have our own feelings, and so that's why I think it as a woman, I think it does make a difference when a woman directs Austen. I mean, of all things, Austen. I mean, she was the epitome of a woman, but a modern woman, but she was a woman. And so I think I think it does make a difference to me.
Amy Heckerling and Clueless, and the person who directed Aisha was a woman, although some of the comments I was reading said she wasn't happy with the final cut since the person who produced it seemed to mess with her vision. But yeah, Debbie said that Hank Green and Bernie Sue did an amazing job with Lizzie Bennet Diaries. Some of the web series also are from women. And I think one of the things about web series is, you know, you can do them on a much cheaper budget. So those may be places where it's easier for women to, I think the Kate Moreland Chronicles team is women, and the people who did Rational Creatures are women. So
Except for the Netflix Persuasion, huh?
And the 1999 Mansfield Park.
not talking about ones in their old
Well, that goes to the thought that only women can direct Austen.
Yeah. Well, Whit Stillman did Love and Friendship, which
Yeah.
I think he is, and we threw in Metropolitan for an adaptation on Mansfield Park because he says that it's kind of loosely based on Mansfield Park. I love Whit Stillman, so he needs to do more Austen. That's what needs to happen.
In Philadelphia about 5 years ago, he talked about he was looking at an Austen, but he said it was a long process and don't commit him. He wasn't going to commit to it. So, and we all looked at each other and went, Mansfield Park. But as I say, he hasn't said anything about it recently.
Yeah.
I'm worried about if Greta Gerwig is ever going to get to the point where she wants to do a Jane Austen, because, I don't know. I'm worried. Not everybody liked her Little Women, and now she's going to do Narnia, and she's going to get around to Jane Austen, and I don't know what she'll do with that. Oh, and she just finished Snow White, and then she had done Barbie as well, so.
Maybe Austen doesn't speak to her.
Everybody, even in the writing world, everybody's doing adaptations of already written stories and classics now. A modern version of things, no?
Some, yeah.
A lot are retellings, tons and tons of retellings.
Anyone else have soundtracks that like draw you to the films? Like one of the things I love about Clueless is the soundtrack to it is just so fun, and I think that's another kind of aspect of the modern retelling is, bringing in music that can be different than, Regency era music, but that still has sort of similar themes. I actually have the soundtrack of Clueless that I like, just it's a CD that I play, so. Has anyone seen Aisha, the Emma? It's an interesting adaptation because it's really trying to combine Emma and Clueless. And it's I don't think it's traditional Bollywood. It's a Hindi language, but there aren't a lot of traditional costumes. There's sort of westernized costumes and more westernized music, and then a couple of traditional costumes and traditional kind of dance numbers. But it's pretty interesting to see it in the context of thinking about both Clueless and the Emma book. Oh, Debbie got to see it in a movie theater. That sounds fun. Yeah, so there's two Aisha movies, and the one that's Bollywood is 2010. They have a really really interesting sort of ball at the crown scene where people are doing salsa dancing, and I put the link in the reviews for the song video for that one because it's pretty amazing dancing for a Jane Austen adaptation. How about, oh, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, I'm sorry. I can deal with something like Lost in Austen, but these newer adaptations just don't speak to me.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say that I read the book, Aisha, and I haven't seen the movie. I'd like to, but in that it kind of showed that the girls were quite modern, wanting to go out and have a good time in a more of a Western way, even though their parents might not have approved.
Other thoughts, other questions?
Well, would anybody highly recommend one to us that we can't not see it?
I'm gonna push the web series. I think the web series are fun and they feel more democratic in a way that, you know, like almost anyone can make a web series. Um, I I think they're interesting. The other one, the Kate Moreland Chronicles, is a retelling of Northanger Abbey, where she's like a fangirl, and she when she was like a teenager, she started a blog for the mysteries of Udolpho. It was a 1 season television show, and it starred Henry Tilney. And so it's really cute how they did it, where she starts working for, it almost seems like People magazine, but it's called Persona magazine, and she works for that magazine, and she starts kind of interviewing Henry, and then they start a relationship. But it's very cute. What I like
I'm-
about the web series is you can watch them in pieces. You don't have to, like, have a 2 hour chunk. You can do
Well,
them.
exactly. With the bite sizes, you can actually really watch it and really see it for what it is and equate it to what you've read. Versus a movie, it just goes by so fast, and you kind of have to pick and choose what you think you see in the movie that relates to the book.
Did anyone ever see, like, I'm curious, I've never seen the web series like when they were being produced, where you had to wait for them to come out, once or twice a week. I'm curious because it seemed like, especially the Lizzie Bennet diaries, they don't have Darcy actually show up until Lizzie's like 60th video or something out of 100 video series. I'm curious if anyone was going through that period of, Frances, did you?
Yeah. So I watched I think all of the web series as they were coming out. I found out about the Lizzie Bennet diaries after a few episodes. And like Debbie, I signed up to Twitter because of the Lizzie Bennet diaries. I no longer am there because Elon Musk. But and it was building up the anticipation. You could see what was happening between the characters on Twitter. And when Darcy arrived, it was a countdown to Darcy Day. And it was a huge thing. Everyone was obsessed. And they also did Q&As with fans. So you could submit questions on Facebook or Twitter, and then they'd do a Q&A video when they did, because they did filming like once a month, and they did a bunch of episodes at once, and they'd also do a Q&A at that time with questions that have accumulated. And that was quite exciting. Yeah, it was really interactive, Jamil. And the main actress who played Lizzie, Ashley Clements, a couple of months ago finished doing a 10-year rewatch of the Lizzie Bennet diaries, where she would have guests who are other actors on the series and talk about every episode as they played it in the background. She did do the Guild, yeah. And it was really good, and you got to learn a lot of background stuff that was going on. And although it looked like all happy families on the surface and we really enjoyed it. Turns out the people who are making it not so great. Yeah.
I was very disappointed that Emma Approved had like a fashion blog, and when you try to go to emmaapproved.com, it no longer exists. I was very disappointed.
They tried to do a second season of Emma Approved with funding it from fans via, I think, Patreon, but they couldn't get enough people funding it for them to be able to do a second season. It was a while after, which probably didn't help things, and literary web series had kind of flagged, and the interest in Pemberley Digital had kind of flagged, and they'd been doing stuff like they did Frankenstein, which is not Austen, it's different fan base, and then they were just distributing the March letters, I think it was, which was Little Women. So I think they didn't hit at quite the right time to continue, and then Bernie Sue has gone on to do TV and stuff, and just go off the backs of all the people who worked really hard on Lizzie Bennet Diaries and didn't get paid anywhere near enough for the work that they did, unfortunately. Sorry.
I have been typing because I didn't think my video and audio would work, but can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Thank you for reading my comments out earlier, but I had to try to unmute for this because one of the things that I thought was the most clever, and I also watched Lizzie Bennet Diaries from like episode 3 or 4. It had been on for a week or so before I found it. But the way they use social media, and they had different people on different social media. So Jane had an Instagram because she was into fashion, while Darcy, of course, had a Twitter because he was more business. But Wickham, we all found out during the series, had something on one of the dating websites. And it was a big deal to go and find his persona and see what he claimed he was as he was out there trying to get the girls. So it was a lot of fun to follow that live, and it was incredibly well thought out. But like Frances, it was incredibly disappointing to find out later how little the actors were paid for the work they did. But Frances, as a fan of Emma Approved as well, you might love that I searched at the time and bought, there was a London cityscape that would sit behind Emma that was like a desk set, and it's still on my desk today. I bought it and I love it. And I have like my little pens go in, Big Ben, and it's a lot of fun.
And I also watched it live as well. Something I'll agree with Frances on for a change. but I was there for Jane Bennett, and Laura Spencer did such a wonderful job with Jane Bennett. She's almost as good as Rosamund. In fact, very better than Rosamund in some other way, small ways.
About anything that people feel like, gets left out with the modern adaptations, in addition to the costumes and the food of the time period? Usually you lose characters, and they sort of pare the story down to the essentials. Especially on the web series, usually you lose the older people in the story, the parents and but
Well, it's like fairy tales. Where are the parents in the fairy tales? I wonder, Frances, would you say that if somebody were to see the Lizzie Bennet Diaries now, would it feel very dated and just not relevant anymore because people have moved past, Twitter and other, they're just not.
It is a little dated, but you'll find that with any adaptation from 10 years ago that it's going to be dated. And it was the first of the literary web series, and probably the biggest of them, and it started the whole trend. So I think it's interesting and worthwhile seeing to see what they did with it, and then you can see when you watch other web series the kind of ideas that they've taken from it. But yeah, it is dated. Because the world changes in 10 years a lot faster, good English there, than it used to, because internet mostly.
So how come that didn't happen with Clueless? Because people still
I
want to
don't
watch
know.
it.
How is Clueless so timeless and so good? I don't understand.
Well, I think part of the reason why Clueless still works, even though, because when we watched it, my husband and I watched it, and we were like talking before we put it on, that there is a chance that we're gonna cringe our way through it. But I think it's the commitment. They committed to a time. They didn't try to do, like modern day where it's sort of undefined. They picked their year and they fell completely in. And so it becomes this almost time capsule. So not only do you have Jane Austen, but you have this 90s time capsule where it is, you go back and you go, oh, I remember that. But it's in a bubble. It's not, like some of them do it where it's the current era, and they kind of make it seem like it's not committing to a year or a point in time. And that's when they start to get dated, where you feel like, well, that's not really how it is now. That phone is wrong, that is, this is wrong. And you start picking at the things that are no longer relevant.
I think the costumes also, they're just so amazing. And I'm sure like even in 1995, it's like, oh no, nobody dresses like Sharon Dion, but it was just so much fun. And I think I read an interview with Amy Heckerling where she was saying like, some of the slang that she used was like just totally created by her. And it wasn't like, teenagers were actually going around saying bugging before, they saw Clueless. So that, some of the things were just totally, were so like novel that, yeah.
So here's a question. Could somebody pull it off again? I mean, could there be an equivalent of Clueless for, let's say, everybody wants Mansfield Park? Could they pull it off now? Or we're too sophisticated now for that?
Well, I was going to say, one of the things that makes Clueless work, yes, it's set in a period of time, but it also has those things we can all relate to, the different cliques in high school. That's sort of a timeless thing. The story with Mansfield Park may be more difficult to find that combination, both of, a time setting and some of the key elements.
I think the timeline, the time setting in Clueless is almost fictional, because real kids didn't talk like that or dress like that. And the fact that it is kind of fictional, even though it is also set in a time period, means that because it was never real, it can never really become outdated in a way. And I would love to see people try and do that with other Austen adaptations, but I think that's a really, really hard thing to hit.
So almost, you could say it's almost cartoonish in a way, no? And that's why it's a bit of a satire parody of sorts. That kind of takes the time out of it, no?
I think in a way that's why Bride and Prejudice works too, because with India, they're not as fully immersed into the modern era. Not to say that they don't have, modern, but that was part of the commentary of that movie, was that they were supposed to be a little backwards and a little, not as in the modern era as Darcy and what was his name?
Balrog.
Barrage. Balraj. And so it was a sort of clash of eras, but because they were kind of sensitive to that, it again feels timeless because you don't look at it and go, like, for example, my husband and I tried to watch an episode of the Max Headroom show. And that was, supposed to be in the future. And we were watching and we're like, oh, this is painful because the technology had moved on. I mean, they did not guess anything right. So it's a future that is deeply rooted in historical technology. And therefore it didn't work anymore. And so when they, with Bride and Prejudice and Clueless, they didn't embrace that sort of modern timeline or that modern moment. They just sort of like put this all in kind of in a, almost like I said, almost own fantasy world. It's all this sort of aside, it's not being swept away by the rest of the world. If that made sense. I feel like that somewhere in there I lost my train of thought.
So it seems like if we are able to suspend our belief and not be critical while we're watching it, then it works. But if there's something that pulls us out of that suspension of belief, then it's just a stark, what's going on here? Almost. No? Because I agree, there's a lot of futuristic media that just doesn't work, but I could watch a Star Trek show now and still feel like I'm looking at the future.
I'm gonna ask a question. I had to step away real quick. Our fire alarm went off. Has anybody seen the musical of Pride and Prejudice? That was good. You gotta find that. I found it online somewhere. But it was like on a streaming, either Hulu or Disney or something. But if you love Austen, it's a necessity. Okay. And then the second thing, we get Prime. Prime is another one of the streaming devices that we have, and there's a series on there called Lost in Austen, and it is did you see it? It's about a girl who is wrapped up in Pride and Prejudice. She gets lost in that, and then she finds herself transported back from present day London to the world of Pride and Prejudice and the experiences that she has. And it's cute. So that's just another thing. I didn't know where y'all were in the questions, but I thought I'd throw that out there in case my fire alarm goes off again. So
You have to mention Austen Land. That's a really nice.
yes, Austen Land. I loved it.
Yeah.
Surprisingly enough, I love that one.
There's a online service called Streaming Musicals. They have a musical, Pride and Prejudice. I don't know if it's the same one you've seen, but since we're talking about updated versions, they have a musical version of Emma, which is set in modern time, and it was quite engaging. So it's called Streaming Musicals.
What was that called?
Streaming Musicals.
Streaming Musicals. Okay.
And they'll cycle through things. They'll have free things every week. Sometimes they do old musicals, but then I think you can also pay for a download to stream particular ones.
Okay, we have 1 more minute and I wanted to do the giveaway. So I'm gonna stop the recording.